Welcome to the Stewardship Leader podcast, brought to you by the Christian Stewardship Network. CSN exists to encourage, teach, and connect church and stewardship leaders to help them create and lead healthy stewardship ministries in their church. You can learn more about CSN at ChristianStewardshipNetwork.com. Well, hi everyone. Welcome to Stewardship Leader. I'm your host, Leo Sabo, and today I have another friend in the ministry, Matt Bell. Matt Bell is a financial expert when it comes to talking about money, teaching on money. This is something that he's been doing for many, many years. He's also written a bunch of books. One of them we're going to talk about today, and that book is Trusted: Preparing Your Kids for a Lifetime of God-Honoring Money Management. We're actually probably going to go into two different episodes, so if you see another episode, it's a continuation of this conversation, because we really want to dig into what do we need to do when it comes to teaching our kids about money. How do we help them to not only understand the biblical principles, but also know what the biblical practices are regarding personal finance? This is something we want to do. But before we get started, Matt, why don't you just say hello to everybody? And again, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Leo. It's really great to be with you. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, so I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure talking with you, Matt. And I thought it would be a benefit to our audience to really dig into this topic more. Many times when we are dealing with finances, we really do kind of struggle with our own personal finances, but then we seem to be a lot more passionate about helping our kids understand this topic. So hopefully that will appeal to a lot more people than just for our own personal finances, because we do want our kids to do better. And this is an area that we can certainly help our kids to get a leg up, so to speak. But before we get started, I just want to introduce you properly. You are working with Sound Mind Investing, and this is a company, a Christian company, that helps people to manage money from a biblical perspective and invest more likely with that perspective. So that's something that's very powerful, and we so appreciate you guys doing what you do. But of course, that's your day job, but you also have a huge passion for personal finance, and you write and speak about personal finances from that biblical perspective, and I so appreciate everything you do. If you want to know more about how Matt speaks and teaches on this topic, you can actually follow him, and you can go to his website. It's mattaboutmoney.com. So it's like Matt About Money, but it's Matt, M-A-T-T, aboutmoney.com. And you can learn more about what Matt is consistently teaching on. Seems like he writes every day. I mean, you write so much, Matt. You got so much content out there. But I still appreciate you really adding so much good content for this topic of biblical stewardship and generosity. And so appreciate you being on today. Why don't you, first of all, just tell us, why are you so passionate about this? You wrote this book, about a year ago now? Why are you so passionate, and why specifically about teaching kids about money?
Yeah, I mean, I love this topic in general, stewardship, biblical financial stewardship, because I came to faith through financial mismanagement. And fortunately, that was early in my life where I could recover from that and learn from that. And just ever since, I've had a passion for bringing this content to other people. But specifically about teaching kids, I just, been involved in stewardship ministry for a long time. And I feel like over time, I've seen time and time again, this idea that people are coming for help. They're 40, 50, 60 years old. They're struggling with debt. They're struggling in their marriage, maybe about financial issues. And I just kept thinking, man, if we could just go upstream, if we could just get to the kids and raise kids from the get-go to understand biblical teaching about money and get them hands-on with money, doing really practical things to express their faith with money from a young age, what a difference that would make. And so I just feel like there's so much potential to getting to people at a very young age with this content where they just grow up with this mindset. Because if we don't as parents teach them about this and bring biblical perspectives to them, it isn't like they won't learn about money. They will learn, but the culture will be their teacher, and the culture speaks strongly and loudly and oftentimes in ways that are contrary to biblical teaching. So it's just so important for us parents to be in the game with this and teaching our kids about this. And there's just so much potential good that could come from all this.
Yeah, I so agree. And you're right. I mean, we could be doing a great job trying to teach so many people that haven't been taught about personal finances. But if we don't do a great job of teaching them early enough so that they can teach their kids, then we're just having to really try to catch up. And it would be so much more effective if we were able to actually teach kids while they're still young and impressionable and willing to grab onto these principles and never really see that side that so many of us have seen, like you, made a lot of financial mistakes early on simply because we didn't know any better, because our parents didn't teach these principles to us. But I'm right there with you. I think if we can teach our kids something that you have done, something that I have done, but again, we made the mistakes, and hopefully we can save our kids from making those same mistakes. And I love that you are pressing into this space because it is so needed. And it is something that I think parents really want to know how to do. So, why don't you talk about the danger of not teaching kids about money? Because I think sometimes people may have this perspective of, well, they're going to learn it eventually. But why don't you talk about the dangers of letting that be the default?
Yeah, there are a lot of dangers about that. And one of the things that's really front and center for me is the way some of the messaging has changed, or really the messaging has become amplified. And what I mean is that years ago, it seemed like the consumer message, it was you don't have enough, and so wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't you feel better about yourself if you had these things? That was kind of the undertone of some of the messaging that kids received and that we all received. And so the concern among parents and those of us that teach on this topic was, wow, kids are spending so much time shopping and getting their identity from their stuff. And that's still true to a great degree. And yet it's become amplified through social media, where now the message has become so strong about not only do you not have enough, but you are not enough, that we're seeing really dramatic manifestations of that. We're seeing young people hurting themselves. We're seeing rises in depression and anxiety and like I said, self-harm and even suicide. There's some really compelling research out there that seems to tie the rise of all those kind of harmful activities in our kids with the presence and the popularity of social media on mobile devices. This was kind of in the 2010s, the early to mid 2010s. You saw middle school students suddenly having access to social media through their mobile devices. And how are kids spending their time? They're spending lots of time on screens. And so, it isn't that as parents, the message should be, don't touch and don't use, and this is horrible. It's more about, hey, this is a reality. And so how can we as parents speak to that in a credible way? How can we kind of step up and be the parent? So yes, set some rules and regs in our households around social media use, screen time, and that sort of thing. But how can we help them see the culture the way it's being presented today? It used to be that marketing messages interrupted what we were watching on TV. Mm-hmm. Now those messages are just woven into the culture. They're in the storylines of movies and TV shows and comic books and video games, and they're, even teenagers sometimes are not aware that there might be a paid relationship with a social media influencer that they follow. And so some of that messaging may not be sincere or authentic. It may be really a paid advertisement that's coming across as just, good, sound advice from a peer. So it's just really important for parents to understand how all of this is working these days and to be in the game about, like I said, setting some rules and regs in our own households for social media and screen time use, but also helping them navigate the messages that they're receiving in our culture.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the other danger with social media is that there are a lot of influences out there that, young adults and kids are following, and they can distinguish the difference between this person's knowledge, personal experience with money. And a lot of times it's portrayed in a way that is all about having and more than enough and being wealthy and pursuing a certain type of lifestyle that just seems appealing to everyone, especially to younger folks. And I think that's one of the dangers, is that they can have someone that they're watching that can influence them about money issues in a way that isn't a balanced message. It's only portraying one side of it and not talking about the dangers of investing in the wrong way or just doing it without knowledge. I understand why parents sometimes feel, let's say, ill-equipped or less than qualified to talk about this. But why don't you address that? What do we tell parents who don't feel qualified? They feel like, I don't know that I'm managing money well. So how can I teach my kids? So how do you deal with that? How do you encourage parents? And what would you say to someone that doesn't feel qualified to teach their own kids about money?
That's a great question. I think a lot of parents are probably in that situation where they're not quite sure how to approach this, or like you're saying, maybe they feel like their own finances are not together enough to be able to have credibility in this topic. But I would say emphatically, you, Mr. or Miss Parent, are absolutely the best teacher for this content. Because schools more and more are starting to do some teaching about money, and that's great, but they can only go so far. It's one thing to talk about the benefits of a savings account. It's another thing to actually take a kid to a bank or a credit union and open an account and walk through that with them. So we as parents have this unique opportunity to actually do real things with money with our kids. And for the parent that doesn't feel qualified, I would say, look, on the one hand, none of us ever get the money thing totally right. We're always learning. We're always growing. There's always more to discover. And so, take some of the pressure off by just realizing the truth of that. But then for those that maybe have some tangible financial struggles, maybe too much debt, for example, is a pretty common thing. I think it's okay that with kids at a certain age, probably by about middle school, it's okay to even say to a kid, look, I, as your parent, have been learning recently about some of these topics of debt and seeing a biblical perspective that the Bible never describes debt as a sin, but it cautions about becoming enslaved to creditors. And so I'm getting that now really for the first time. And so even as your parent, I want to share that with you and tell you that I'm on a journey of getting completely debt free. I really want that for our family. I want that as kind of a role model for you. So it's okay to be authentic about that and to kind of ride this journey with your kids. So I would just say, look, you probably know more than you realize, and you can benefit your kids more than you realize. And so just coming alongside them and starting to open up some conversations about some of your day-to-day habits and practices while you're learning would be a really good thing. In fact, in the book, the first half of every really practical chapter in the book is addressed to the parents for these very reasons that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because it's not really the practical stuff that our kids need help with. Sure, we can teach that. But that's not really the biggest hurdle to managing money well or teaching your kids to embrace those principles. It's the why behind it, right? It's the morality of it. It's the doing it for the right reason and not allowing the world to shape you in its image rather than you shaping the world and your life according to that biblical perspective that we have as Christians. And I think that's such an encouragement to parents to realize that they may feel unqualified, but they are the most qualified to be able to speak into their kids' lives on any subject, right? They are really the ones that should influence the kids the most, because they love them the most and care about their potential, future the most. And I really appreciate the fact that you touched on the transparency. Sometimes parents don't feel qualified, but that's okay. None of us really figure this out completely perfectly. But it's that journey that if we're on that journey and willing to learn and go on that journey, then we become qualified by that very fact that we're doing it and asking our kids to come along on that same journey. So I love that. And just being vulnerable and letting your kids know, hey, you're going to make mistakes. I've made mistakes. I may still make mistakes. But this pursuit of managing money from a biblical perspective will yield much better fruit in the long run than doing it any other way. So appreciate that. Now,
Yeah.
you mentioned the book. You mentioned something about the fact that the first portion of every chapter is really focusing on the parent and helping the parent understand it. You also use a metaphor of a funnel to describe an overarching approach to teaching our kids about the topic. Why don't you talk about that?
This came about in the first parenting class that my wife Jude and I ever took back in Chicago at our church there. The associate pastor and his wife were teaching young couples about money, and they were using this metaphor, and also, not just young couples, but couples who are early in the parenting journey. So they used this concept of this metaphor, the funnel. They said, when kids are super young, we're doing everything for them. The funnel is super tight. We're deciding what they're going to wear, what they're going to eat, who they're going to go on a play date with, that sort of thing. But as they get older, a good goal would be to start opening the funnel wider and wider. Ultimately, we want our kids to go off to college and beyond, well equipped to make great decisions on their own. And so the process from very young kid, where you're making all the decisions to that point when they're going off to college or on their own, it involves opening that funnel by teaching them, by entrusting them with more and more responsibility. And as they prove themselves trustworthy, this is right out of Luke 16:10, as they prove themselves trustworthy, we entrust them with more. It's just it's a biblical principle. It's a very practical principle. And it's just that idea to be intentional about giving kids more and more responsibility, teaching them well, and as they prove themselves trustworthy, continuing down that path. So, for example, if you're teaching your kid about developing a great work ethic, sometimes we make the mistake, I think, as parents, of thinking our kids are not ready for certain things that they are ready for. When a kid is pretty young, 2 and 3, they should be bringing their dirty clothes to the laundry basket. That's totally, that's very doable for a kid at that age. By age 9 or 10, they could be doing their own laundry. That's not unrealistic. And so again, it's opening that funnel wider and wider, teaching them well, and trusting them with more and more responsibility. That's how they grow.
Yeah, I love that analogy of the funnel, just that picture of, you start out really with guide rails that are very tight with kids, regardless of what you're teaching, but especially when it comes to finances. And then as they get older, you want to open that up and give them more opportunities to make not only decisions, but mistakes.
That's right.
I mean, I think this is one of the things that I appreciate about what you shared in your book is that, the idea of setting boundaries, but then really understanding that your kids need to understand and embrace the world and eventually make their own decisions. You don't want to raise kids that are constantly looking to you for what to do next. You want independent children that will eventually be able to manage their own life. And so this funnel approach or description of how this approach can help with teaching kids about money really is a great way to think about, we do need to open up our hands and allow our kids to do it, and knowing that they're probably going to get it wrong. A quick example, when my wife Natalie and I started teaching our girls about money, they were 5 and 7. And if you imagine a 5-year-old, like they didn't know anything about anything. But as soon as we described the idea of them receiving an allowance, and then they could use that allowance for some things for their own purpose and other things that were going to be more guided by us. So we do the 10-10-80 approach, which is 10% given back to the Lord, 10% is saved, and then 80% is spent. And I remember the first week, my wife took them after they got their allowance. They have this money in their hands, right? Physical money. And they went to the store and they spent all the 80% they had, whatever it was, like $2.50 or whatever, spent all of it. And I remember I was wanting them to not to do that, trying to tell them, don't waste all your money. You might want something later. And my wife just kind of raised her hand and said, stop, let them do it. They're going to learn. They're going to learn to manage money. You can't tell them how to do every little step. And as a parent, I wanted to help them not get it wrong. But my wife was a lot wiser than I was at that time. And she said, no, let them make mistakes. And eventually they realized, because as soon as they spend the money, literally the next day, they're like, can I get an extension on my allowance from next week? And we're like, sorry, we don't believe in borrowing and lending. So it was such a cool lesson, though, because early on they realized, oh, okay, I need to manage my money to have it for the things that I really want, not for whatever, pops in my head. So that was a very valuable lesson.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, it's hard, as parents to resist the temptation to swoop in and save the day. We love our kids. We want good things for our kids. We don't want our kids to feel pain. And yet if we shelter them and we don't allow them to experience the pain of regret, of wishing they had done something different, of wishing they hadn't spent all of their allowance right away, that does them more harm than good. That is one of the most effective teachers. And while they're young, it's kind of like skiing. I'm not some great skier, but when a kid is super young, they're super small, so they don't have too far to fall. They can't really get hurt that badly.
That's true.
And the same principle is true with money. They're not dealing with millions of dollars here. They're dealing with small amounts of money. So this is the time to make some mistakes so that they learn those lessons early, so that later when they are managing more, they'll be well equipped for that.
This episode of the Stewardship Leader podcast is sponsored by Christian Financial Resources. Christian Financial Resources is a not-for-profit organization with a mission of funding ministry, changing lives. CFR assists independent Christian churches and their associated ministries. Since 1980, hundreds of ministry projects have received funding through CFR. These projects include land acquisitions, loan refinances, and the construction improvement of church buildings, parsonages, schools, and various other facilities operated by those congregations. CFR currently manages more than $880 million in total assets while serving over 7,000 investment accounts. In addition to loans and investments, CFR offers stewardship services, donor advised funds, legacy planning, life income agreements, capital campaigns, and generosity initiatives. Learn more about us at cfrministry.org.
Matt, you talked about this specific thing about like parenting roles, and I think you covered 3 distinct parenting roles in your book that's helpful in teaching kids about money. Why don't you talk about that?
Sure. So the 3 roles are gatekeeper, teacher, and role model. And so the gatekeeper is the one that, a lot of parents kind of don't like having to do it, but it's really about being the parent. It's about saying no sometimes. It's about setting boundaries. It's about, we were talking about social media earlier. It's being that unpopular parent who says, you know what, all screens are off by a certain time, and we only have, this amount of time per day online, and the screens are visible wherever we go. We're never behind closed doors and using screens. It's the gatekeeper. It's setting the rules and regs in our household because we are the parents after all. And that's good for kids to have boundaries, to have limits. The teacher is just what it sounds like. We're teaching them overt things. We're teaching them God's word. I love scripture memory and encouraging kids to memorize scripture. So we're teaching them God's word, and then we're teaching them the practical applications of God's word. So in the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil, but a foolish person devours all they have. Let's go to a bank or a credit union. Let's open an account. Let's set aside a reserve for the future. And then the role model is, of course, we need to be modeling this stuff in front of our kids. And again, we're not always going to get it right, but our kids are watching us more closely, and they're listening to us more closely than sometimes we realize. And so as we live this stuff out loud in front of them, that's how they learn as well. So those 3, I think it's helpful for parents to be consciously aware of those 3 roles and to actively embrace those 3 roles in teaching our kids.
Yeah, those are great. All right. So in your book, I know you touched on several things. So I think one of the first things that you touched on, if I remember correctly, is on being a diligent earner. So why don't we start talking about that? Because I remember we started giving our children an allowance, but we also tied that to their chores, right? We kind of the way we structured in our family, we said everybody has a role to play. Some of your role is keeping track of your own toys and cleaning up your room. And there are some small chores that were age appropriate that we built into it, and we tied the allowance to that, so that it didn't feel like they were just getting money because they were born, right? There was some kind of labor involved. So we're trying to teach working as a an important thing that they should do and do well. But I remember how much that shifted when they started making their own money. Right. So we built some principles, some processes of how to manage money and make money decisions. When they became earners, it kind of began to be at a different level. So why don't you talk about that? Because I think it's important to understand that, especially for those kids who are already starting to make money or have a desire to make money, this is a great opportunity to begin to teach your kids about money.
Yeah, absolutely. So several things. I mean, for one, we want to teach our kids to be diligent in their work. That means being on time for a certain job you're responsible for. That means kind of owning the results of the job, doing the job well. That means doing the job without grumbling or complaining. That means, practical things like that. And there's the gatekeeper. So if we are paying our kids for a certain type of chore, then we have the right, of course, to expect that job is done well and that job is done without complaint. That's kind of the gatekeeper. Teacher comes before that. We're teaching them how to do that work. So we want our kids to be diligent. I mean, Colossians 3:23 is the classic verse on this, right? Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. And so we want to tie scripture to it as well. We want them to see that this is a biblical teaching, that this is honoring to God by how you come at your work, by how diligent you are in doing your work. So it's teaching that work ethic is part of it. And then, like you're talking about, Leo, where you're starting to tie money to it. So there's a couple that we know that I kind of like their system where they've got 3 different levels of chores for the kids. They have 5 kids. So they've got the mandatory no pay jobs. Those are things like making your bed. You're part of the family. You're responsible for making your bed every day. Then there are mandatory 4-pay jobs. That might be things like clearing the dishwasher. And then there are optional 4-pay jobs if they want to earn more. That might be yard work. But as you start to bring in some of these values and some of these aspects of a diligent work ethic into it, some of those lines can start to blur. So, for example, if they have a mandatory 4-pay job, but they do it with a bad attitude, or they have to be asked 3 times to do that job, that might turn into a mandatory for no pay job or a mandatory for less pay job. So it's very, money can be used as an incentive for a job well done. It can be also be used as a penalty for a job not so well done. So I think it's helpful to use money in those ways.
It is such a great tool. I do recall multiple opportunities for us to share these kinds of principles to our kids. We did very much what you just talked about, which is that we provided an allowance, but the allowance was tied to specific jobs that they had to do, chores. And I remember one of the stipulation was that if they didn't do their chores, they would still receive their allowance. However, my wife would keep track anytime she would do any of their chores, or I would have to do one of their chores. And if we did, there was a cost to it. So for instance, if we had to make their bed or clean their bathroom, there was a cost to it. So when they got paid, they had to pay us back for the work we did on their behalf.
I love that.
which really sunk in very quickly because they realized, gosh, yes, it's my money, but I can give it away by not doing my job. Yeah. And again, that emphasized a job well done is going to be rewarded. A job not done or not done well is not. There's going to be a cost to that. And we made it very physical because we wanted to portray this idea that work needs to be done and needs to be done well. So I agree with you. It's such a powerful tool that we could use, again, positively and negatively to make these points across, because they will be part of their lives. They will have to deal with not showing up on time and getting fired, right? That's going to be a real consequence. And if they're not able to understand that, they might think the world's against them, but it's not. It's just something they should have learned and something us as parents should have allowed to happen or even set up to happen so that they can understand the consequence of that. So yeah. I do love the practicality and the way you bring that into your book, but I think you wanted to add to that, so go for
it. That's the real world. What you did there, what you just described, that's the real world. Because if you've got a job that needs to be done and they're responsible for that job and they don't get it done, you've got to hire somebody else. So I like the system that you created where they actually get a bill for it because somebody else had to do the job that they were responsible for. And one other point, if I could, Leo, on this topic of diligent work ethic and kind of fostering that in our kids, there's a great bit of research out there that talks about styles of parenting. And after many years of experimenting and looking at different styles of parenting, the research community really rallied around a style that they call authoritative parenting. That's not authoritarian parenting, that's authoritative parenting. And that's the idea of setting high standards, high expectations for our kids, but enforcing those standards warmly. So, it might be that, one of the examples in the book, one of the ideas we want to teach our kids, one of the values we want to teach them is we finish what we start. So there's a story in the book about a guy who looked back, and I think in his 6th grade, somewhere between 6th and 7th grade, he joined the football team. And almost immediately, things did not go well. He wasn't very big, but he was put on the line for some reason. He wanted to quit. His parents said, we finish what we start. And the next day, at the breakfast table, as he was getting ready to go off to football practice, not really thrilled about it, but there was a note from his dad on the table that said, Zach, we know that you can do this. We believe in you. You've got this. And there were scripture references there that talked about perseverance and strength. And he went and he finished out the season. And he has kept that note all these years. He's an adult now. He has a child of his own. And so that was really impactful. That's setting a high bar, high standard. We finish what we start, but it was enforcing it warmly.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I have a friend who I meet with on a weekly basis for breakfast, and he shares a story that his mom communicated with him. And it was he had taken a class. This was his first year in college. He was pursuing a certain major, but then eventually changed his mind halfway through a specific class he had taken. And I think it was on biology or something like that. I forget what the major was, but he was changing his mind and he wanted to drop the class. And his mom said, No. She said, I'd like you to finish it, and I want you to do your best to get the best grade you can. And she was trying to teach him, which she was very effective in doing, is that you have to take something all the way to the end. Don't quit halfway because it's hard. You may not become a biologist, you may not become whatever. It may not be for you, but how do you know unless you get all the way through? Finish the class, and at the end of it, if you've done your best and you still feel the same way, then you can change your major and move on to something else, which he did. But his mom taught him that lesson, and it was such a powerful lesson because it had nothing to do really with his career so much as it did with this idea that you pursue and you stay diligent and you finish what you start. And to this day, when he shares that with me, and he's shared it many, many times, it continues to show up in his life in many ways. And I think that's the thing that we get to do when we're teaching our kids, not just about money, but anything, is that we're teaching them life lessons that are going to serve them literally for the rest of their lives. And so it's such a powerful tool that we can use to do that.
Yeah, that's right. We're teaching them values. We're teaching them character traits where, it's one thing to learn how does the lawnmower work and how do I mow the lawn properly, but there's something much more significant going on there as well. There are values being instilled. There's character being built. It's much more than just the job. And it's so critically important, again, to tie it back to Scripture, to show our kids that working well, folding the clothes properly, setting the table properly, doing all these things, it's about glorifying God. It's not about, mom and dad are just a little too nitpicky about how this is done. No, we want to glorify God in the way that we work. And actually, in the way we work, we can show others eventually about God, because it stands out. These days, you interact with somebody in customer service or in some other role in your day-to-day life, and they do an unusually good job in their work. It stands out, and it sometimes generates questions. And so I really think that the way we work can glorify God, and it can show others who God is.
So agree. A couple of different things I want to touch on before we end this episode, Matt, is I mentioned just the way my wife and I did the allowance and how it worked, but I'd love to hear how you teach this to parents. How do you approach the allowance so that it's not something that's done either in the wrong way or it can become a contentious topic among parents? So talk about that, and then I'm going to follow up with another question. You can roll right into it, and that is you suggest that we can teach kids about basic budgeting. What are some of the early lessons that parents can teach their kids, about managing money? So whether it's through an allowance, and then how do they take it to the next step? So if we're talking about young kids, how did they get them started? Because I think sometimes parents just don't know where to begin, and they think it's maybe too complex, and they're more likely to wait, I think, until they're a little older. And I think that's a missed opportunity. The younger you can start, the better. At least that's how I feel. But I'd love to get your feedback on the allowance and then how to teach kids early on about budgeting.
Sure. So when it comes to allowances, you used a very appropriate word. You used the word contentious. I'm amazed how contentious this topic can be among parents, because some parents have very strong points of view about this. There are some parents that say the word allowance must never be used in our household. We don't just give money to kids. Everything's got to be earned. Other parents take the point of view, you're part of the family. You're going to, certain things are going to be expected of you, and certain amount of money is going to be entrusted to you. And some parents kind of go in between those two ends. But I think the important thing is for parents to have unity about whatever whatever system you create, and you want to create a system that's manageable. You don't want to be so complex that you forget, did this chore get done? Did that get done? Some people have a chore chart in the kitchen that they keep track that way. The important overarching point is that money gets in our kids' hands somehow, some way. So I mentioned a couple in our small group that I really like their system of mandatory no pay, mandatory for pay, and then optional for pay jobs. I think that's a great system. In our household, we did give our kids a little bit of money. It was grade plus one. So kindergarten, they got $1 a week. First grade, they got $2 a week. And then that ended in the fifth grade or after the fifth grade, because we felt like they were old enough then to be doing more and more, even for neighbors, of pet sitting and those sorts of things, to be able to earn more of it. We gave them a little bit just because they were part of the family, but we didn't give them so much that they could do anything that they wanted. They were highly motivated to do additional work for additional money. So again, there's different systems out there. The important thing is to get some money in your kids' hands, to use it as a teaching tool for a job well done or not, and for there to be unity among spouses about the system that you're going to use. So I think that the key thing is just get some money in the kids' hands so they're making real decisions with real money. So, sometimes I see parents going into church, and for churches that still take up a collection in person, I'll see parents like handing money to the kids to give. No, I want the kids to be giving money that is theirs, that they earn somehow. I see parents, doing almost too much for their kids sometimes. I want kids to be hands-on with money. So somehow, some way, I want a system developed in the household where kids are getting some money to do real things in the real world with that money.
Yeah, I so agree. I think it's a hard thing for a parent because you think, gosh, they're just kids. And I hear all the time, they're just kids. Let them be kids. Let them enjoy life. Sure, I'm in total agreement with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And sure, a kid should be a kid. But as they get older, realize that you can't put off training them and teaching them these principles, that the world is actually already beginning to shape these ideas and principles in them. So if we have no say into that, no input into that, then they're just going to embrace something that we may later not be able to undo. So they can still be kids and be taught while they're growing and still having fun and just being kids. And I think that's something that my wife and I have experienced with our girls. We didn't make it so difficult that their whole life became about money and money management and chores. No, there were girls who had parties and hang out with their friends and all of that. But we took those opportunities just to be able to begin to instill these principles that we knew were going to be important in their lives, not just about money, but everything else that money can open the door for us to input into our kids' training. So talk about how we can teach on the practical basis the basics of budgeting to this age group.
Yeah, the whole idea you mentioned before, the 10-10-80, or in the book, I actually encourage a little bit of higher level of savings among kids. Not that it's cast in stone, but I just think they have a great opportunity to save at a young age when they're not responsible for the mortgage and those sorts of things. But I mean, that's a beginner's budget. If you've got a 3-slotted piggy bank, or you're using 3 envelopes or 3 mason jars, or eventually 4 as you start to incorporate investing into their education, that's a beginner's budget. Because a budget, it's taking money that comes in and now allocating it for specific purposes and putting it to those purposes. So when you're doing that, you've got that piggy bank with give, save, spend. That's a beginner's budget. So that's fantastic. And then as they start to get a little bit older, you can start to add some more categories to it. They're saving for certain things. You're setting aside money for this or that. I love the idea of getting kids to be responsible for more and more categories as they get older. So as they get older, now they're suddenly responsible for their clothing. So we're giving them the money that we would have spent, but now it's theirs to manage. So over time, again, it's that idea of the funnel. We're opening the funnel wider and wider. First, it's give, save, spend. Now spending is going to be allocated toward clothing and toward entertainment and other things. We're just moving them along. We're opening that funnel wider and wider so that they're learning how to allocate and how to have enough for these various purposes.
Yeah, that brings to mind, and I love what you just shared, the fact that we need to increase their ability to understand and expand those categories, right? Because they're going to want more things. As they get older, they want more and more things. And the natural, I think, understanding or default for kids is to think, well, mom and dad's just going to provide for that, right? If I have more needs, if I have, more expenses that I want, better clothing, whatever it is, that mom and dad's just going to make up for that. And we need to help them understand that our money is our money and that they need to earn their own money when they have their own wants. Not the needs, we'll provide for the needs, but those wants, they can live without them. But if they really want them, that working for them is a good thing. And that's part of what we were trying to teach our kids. And then there came a season where the kids really wanted to have phones. And the girls were only like in, I think, 6th and 8th grade. And we're like, you're not ready for a phone yet. We're still taking you to school, picking you up from school. You don't need a phone. So we put it off as much as we could. But eventually we said, okay, everybody else has phones. We're 2-3 years after everybody else got phones in their age group. And we decided, okay, we're going to do it. But what we told them is if you want a phone, you're going to have to use your own allowance money, right? Your own spending money has to go into it. And at that time, I think it came out to like $17.50 per month for each line that they had to pay. And of course, we paid some of that, the taxes or whatever, but they had to pay $17.50. The number somehow sticks in my mind. But what's interesting is they looked at that and said, okay, is having a phone important to lose more than half? Because it was about 60% of their allowance at that time. They were still, under, because we gave them an allowance until they turned 16 when they got their first job, and they had to get their first job at 16 because their allowance was going to stop on their birthday anyway. And it was such an interesting time for them to kind of think through: am I willing? Is this valuable enough to me to give up 60% of my income right now to have this phone? And they both decided that it was. But they lost more than 50% of their income. So it was just interesting to see that decision. Now, most parents today, well, from what I'm seeing, they just pay for the line. They don't even bother telling the kids. And I've even seen adult kids where the parents are still paying for their phones. And again, sometimes we want to help our kids, but we overdo it. And in this instance, I think it's a missed opportunity because we are helping them to make a decision between what's important and what's more important. Not that there's not anything wrong with having something, but is it as important as maybe another decisions you need to make? And I think that's something that they're going to struggle with all their lives, right? No one has endless supply of money, and they have to make decisions between needs, wants, and desires. And this is the way we can teach our kids to do that.
That's right. And you're introducing them to the real world that way. You're causing them to make trade-offs and to decide what's valuable to them. So that's fantastic. There was a time when one of our kids was swinging a big cardboard tube around the kitchen, and we asked him twice to put it down, to stop doing that, but he continued. And he ended up knocking over a glass of water onto a computer, which turned into a very expensive repair. It would have been totally overwhelming if we made him pay for all of it, but we did make him pay for about half of it, which required a lot of him. It actually, if I remember correctly, it basically drained his savings account at that age, and it ended that allowance that we've been giving him a year early. So that's the real world. Some parents might say, oh, that's too much. Well, no, we covered about half of the cost, but it's not done in anger. It's not done to be mean, but it's just done to realize that this is the real world, and to help them see, having some money in reserve, sometimes you got to use it for something that's not really fun, not a vacation this time. It's for some problem that happened, because that does happen in life. So the example you're using, or when I think back on that incident with the computer, I just think these are tough decisions for parents to make sometimes, and especially because we look around and we see other parents making other choices, and the kids certainly notice other parents of their friends making other choices, and that can create its own pressure unto itself. But if we know that it's for their good, hopefully that's motivation to carry through on some of these more difficult decisions.
Yeah, I agree. It is tough, and sometimes, like you said, sometimes what the decision we make and how we raise our kids is in contrast to how other children are being raised, what they get that our kids may not get. But I think we need to resist, and I think it's important to resist the pressure of allowing someone else's lifestyle choices, their parenting skills, to really affect what we know, what we believe is the best for our kids. We are, stewarding these lives, right? It's our responsibility to raise them well. And my wife and I had this very basic understanding that, and I think I'm so grateful that both of us were raised similar in this way, that our parents just didn't give us anything beyond the day we could stand up. Other than food and clothing, we had to make our way. And both of us started working way before 16 years of age, and it just became a value that you work hard, you get what you get what you pay for, and you get what you work for. And for us, that was valuable. And we wanted to pass that on to our kids. And sometimes our parents didn't agree. They thought we were too hard on the girls. But we now have two independent adults who have their own families, who don't need our financial assistance to get by. They're not looking to move back in anytime soon. I think that's all of us. We want that. We want that for our kids. We want them to be self-sustaining, to be able to, to manage their own lives. And I think we miss out when we don't give them this opportunity through these small and bigger lessons that we have opportunity to impart to them.
And that's the thing, is to cling to that vision of the future. There is some hard work involved in parenting, as every parent knows. But if you cling to that vision that, teaching them with that piggy bank to give, to save, to spend, that's going to be good for their future marriage. I mean, there's research out there, and it's just intuitive that if one spouse thinks the other spouse spends money carelessly, that's not good for the marriage. And so this early lesson, that little piggy bank, as cute and seemingly relatively insignificant as it may seem, it's very significant. It's teaching kids habits that when they get older, the value of that will really blossom. So as we see that this training that we're doing with our kids, it's for the good of their future marriage. It's for the good of their relationship with Christ, for sure. It's just about so much good and wanting so much good for our kids and seeing that future vision.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I so appreciate your wisdom in this and just everything that you've done. And of course, the book that you've written. This is such a great resource that I really highly recommend for any parent of any age kid to get and read through. There's so much wisdom in that that you're sharing. And so I appreciate what you do and your passion for this, because I think it does help people more so than what we've had in the past. I so appreciate that you did this, because I remember when my wife and I learned about money, there wasn't as much resource and wisdom out there about this when we were raising kids. And so I'm so grateful that this resource exists, that you're consistently talking about this. And we're going to continue this conversation in the next episode. But before we wrap up, I understand that there's now a small group discussion guide that go along with the book. So I'd love for you to talk about that and tell us how we can get our hands on that before we end today.
That's great. Yeah, this discussion guide, I spent about a year working on it after the book came out. And I love the idea of parents gathering together in a small group setting to go through the book together, little by little, to discuss the content, to then go in between sessions and bring this teaching to their kids and come back together and talk about what's working, what's not working, to be an encouragement for each other, to pray for each other, to pray for each other's kids. I think a small group setting is really the perfect setting for parents to dive into this content together. So I'm excited about that. It's a free download. You can get it off my website, mattaboutmoney.com. On the books tab, you'll find it easily there. I just really encourage parents to, maybe form a short-term small group to talk about this with some other parents that or maybe you're part of a small group and this could plug into the next round of whatever you're going to dive into together. But I just love the idea. I think it's really the perfect setting for bringing these ideas into our families.
So agree. And the price is certainly right. I mean, when you're offering this for free, there's no reason why people shouldn't be doing it. Well, Matt, thanks again for joining us today for this. I so appreciate all that you do again. And I look forward to having another conversation with you, going a little deeper into how do you actually help parents teach their kids about money. Some of the specifics we talk about in the next episode will be about the aspects of money management, giving, saving, investing. So I'm looking forward to that. In the meantime, again, thanks so much for doing this. So appreciate you as a friend, but also as a colleague in this area of personal finance, and especially from that biblical perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And we want to thank you. If you've listened to this podcast, we encourage you to share it with someone that may benefit from this content. We are a group of stewardship leaders, and we're passionate about talking about money and biblical stewardship, and really teaching others to do the same, right? Just to become good stewards. This is what we are. We are stewards. God is the owner. We're the stewards. And it's just a matter of what kind of stewards do we wish to be. And this ministry is really focused on helping you through your church to understand biblical stewardship, to impart it to others, to teach it and train others on how to do it, including, of course, children. So we're so grateful that you've listened to this podcast, and we'd love to connect with you. If there's anything we can do to help you to take this kind of content into your own context in your own church, connect with us. Let us know how we can help you. We're at ChristianStewardshipNetwork.com, and we would love to come alongside you and help you in this ministry. If you want to know more about Matt and what he's doing, again, go to mattaboutmoney.com, and you can find a ton of resources there. He is, again, constantly creating more content, and I think you'll find his style of teaching and writing really, really compelling, and I think it'll be very, very helpful for you and your own personal journey. Again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Stewardship Leader.